Quiet Strength, Chapter 17, Death by Inches. I was excited and believed that everything was moving in the right direction for the Colts. When the 2004 season rolled around, we felt as if we were on the cusp of taking that final step and making it to the Super Bowl. In the second round of the 2004 draft, we added another key piece to the puzzle with Bob Sanders, a safety from the University of Iowa. Right after the draft, however, that good feeling was temporarily interrupted when I received a phone call from my dad. He told me that although he felt great, a routine physical had revealed a problem with his blood work. Another test confirmed the doctor's suspicions: leukemia. I was in shock because my dad was in such great shape for his age. Every day he woke up at 5:30, rode his bike about 5 miles to Bob Evans for breakfast, and then rode back home. 2 days a week, he went to the YMCA to swim. I could hardly believe that this vigorous man had a serious health problem. My sister Lauren, the doctor, brought my dad to Indianapolis for treatment at the world-class oncology center at the Indiana University School of Medicine. He went through an extensive chemotherapy regime over the next couple of months. I loved that time with him. He didn't seem to be experiencing any of the side effects the doctors had warned us about. Just sitting together in his hospital room was wonderful. We reminisced about fishing and hooks through the ear and Tigers games and Michigan State games. I reminded him of the times when we had visited my aunt and uncle, staying up late to watch war movies and westerns with them. Even though my dad had thought I should be in bed, my Uncle Paul had always talked him into letting me stay up. My dad remembered playing catch and shooting baskets with me, all the quality moments that a father spends with his son. He especially wanted to know how our off-season workouts were going. During my days with my dad, I thought a lot about the time I'd spent with my own children. When I was growing up, my dad spent quality and quantity time with us. He always made sure he was around the house and at our games. I hadn't always done that with my children. I had tried to shorten my work days to give the players Sundays off during the season whenever possible and to make sure everyone got home at a reasonable hour. But the time I had spent with my children was nowhere near the amount of time my dad had made for us. I knew I was spending as much time as I could with my kids, but compared to my dad, it just didn't seem like I was doing enough. I was grateful for the times we had shared as a family, but was disappointed in myself. So through his dad's illness and he's spending time with his dad, he's reflecting on his life with his dad and how much his dad was always there for him, that he spent not just like a large amount of quantity, right? A large amount of time with him, but the quality of time he spent with him was good as well. All the lessons that he imparted on Tony throughout Tony's childhood. And Tony's thinking about that and he's realizing that, have I done that with my kids? Have I spent enough time with them? And if I have spent enough time with them, has it truly been quality time with them? And so his dad's illness really makes Tony reflect back on his relationship with his own kids. This was probably the first time I ever thought about purposely leaving coaching of my own accord. I had already made adjustments years ago, starting meetings later so I could take my children to school, never sleeping at the office, allowing families to be together in our offices, and short of leaving the profession, I didn't think there were any other changes I could make. I began to give the idea some serious thought. Football is a vocation and an opportunity for ministry, but it's not a life. It helped a little knowing that Lauren and the kids would be moving to Indianapolis full-time that summer, even though we would still keep the house in Tampa. Tiara had finished high school, and after missing 2 years of driving my kids to school, I was eager to see them again on a daily basis. In June, we got some great news from my dad's doctors. The leukemia was in remission, and my dad was going to be able to go home to my sister's house. We were relieved and thrilled. My dad was excited because he wanted to be around when we made it to the Super Bowl. He had always claimed that a Super Bowl appearance was inevitable for us if we stayed the course and did what we did. Less than a week later, the tide turned again when my sister called and said that we needed to come to the hospital immediately to visit my dad before he died. With his white blood cell count extremely low from the chemotherapy, his immune system had been vulnerable and he had developed an infection. He died that night, June 8th, only 29 months after my mom had passed. In the space of 2 months, we went from fears of a leukemia diagnosis and the rigors of the treatment to the euphoria of his recovery to loss and grief. A lot of family members came into town the next day, and I needed to attend the last day of our off-season workouts. Actually, I didn't really need to be there. The assistants could have handled it. It was only a couple of hours. But then I thought about my dad and the things he'd always taught me. More than anything else, my dad loved watching us practice. I knew he would have wanted me to be with my team. I arrived at the facility. Jeff Saturday, a great player and even better person, was one of the few players who knew my dad had died. After practice, Jeff let the team know about my dad's death before I explained why I was there with them that day. My dad always felt like practice was where you did your job. If a student learned during the week and studied hard, the test would be easy and take care of itself. It's the same way with practice. He liked you guys, and he especially liked the way you practice. That's why he always felt confident that we were going to do well. Most of the veterans knew my dad because he had been around so much, but that day, our rookies learned a little bit about why I am the way I am. Okay, so that's really sad. I mean, it's really hard to lose a parent no matter what age you are. And you know, Tony's dad goes through leukemia, and then they hear, okay, he's in remission, he's going to be okay. And then just like that, he gets an infection and passes away. And, you know, everyone deals with grief in different ways and processes differently. And for Tony, he felt it best like to go to practice, right? He needed to be around other people. He needed to take his mind off things for a little while. And so that's what he does. Under a clear blue sky, a man sprints to catch a speeding train. He has fired a machine gun at his pursuers, Nazis, and thrown grenades at them, setting various other charges and traps for them as well. Now he is almost caught up with the German transport train that he and his fellow prisoners of war have commandeered and are riding into Switzerland. He closes in on the train, running with his hand out, and is shot and killed with his hand just inches from his fellow prisoners and only feet away from the Swiss border in safety. Death by inches. I showed that movie clip in the first meeting of training camp in 2004. When the clip ended, I explained the theory of death by inches, which Frank Sinatra suffered at the end of Von Ryan's Express. It was one of those movies I had watched as a boy late at night with my Uncle Paul, my Aunt Rosemary, and my dad. I explained to the team that it wasn't the big things that had tripped us up in previous years, but rather a combination of small details. By focusing on those details, the inches, we could reach our goal rather than coming up just short. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to do what we do. We're just going to do it better. We're not going to focus on improving last year's 12-4 season, but we are going to look to improve and win our first game. And then we'll get better and win our second game. We're going to do it by doing the little things right. Okay, so this is the title of the chapter. Right? The title of the chapter is Death by Inches. And so in it, Tony gives this example of this old movie, Von Ryan's Express, that he used to watch with his dad and his aunt and his uncle. And in the movie, there's a character who is trying to catch this train and get away from the Nazis. And they're really close to the Switzerland border and to safety away from the Nazis, right? Everyone's like reaching out their hands for this guy to grab a hold of. And right as he is almost to the train, just inches away from getting on, he's shot and killed by the Nazis, right? So just a few more inches and he would have been to safety. And Tony uses this movie as an example for his players, right? He says, I explained to the team that it wasn't the big things that had tripped us in previous years, but rather a combination of the small details. By focusing on those details, inches, we could reach our goal rather than coming up just short, right? Sometimes it's not the big things that get you, right? It's the little details that can cause you to fall down. It's those extra few inches, right, that cause you to lose. And so Tony says, so we got to take care of. We got to take care of those small details, right, and clean ourselves up and do what we do, and we're going to get to that Super Bowl. Every year, the topic of my first talk at training camp is family. I want each guy to understand that his family is his first priority. Deal with them, focus on them, and take care of any issues or problems related to them. I said to the team in 2004, if I ever learned that there was something with your family that needed to be addressed and you put team considerations before family without talking with me, there's going to be a problem. A big problem. Especially now, I thought. After reflecting on all those memories with my dad, I realized that we just don't have family forever. When you're thinking about death, you get more focused on time, the time you have today, and how it seems to be screaming past. As a head coach, I've been interviewed by the media a great deal, and I pride myself in answering questions honestly without becoming a distraction. As a result, I tend not to find myself in the midst of controversy, but in 2004 I did, more than once. I usually don't think in terms of sound bites, but I've learned that I have to be more aware of the way they can be misused and the power they have to shape opinions. The first incident occurred just after the Philadelphia Eagles played on Monday Night Football. At the time, ABC was opening those broadcasts with skits featuring star players. That week's skit showed a white actress from Desperate Housewives standing alone in the locker room with Philadelphia Eagles receiver Terrell Owens, who is African American. Wearing only a towel, she provocatively asked Terrell to skip the game for her, and after several rebuffs, finally convinced him, dropping her towel and jumping into his arms. T.O. grinned and said something along the lines of, "The guys will understand." I didn't get home that night until after the game had started, so I didn't know anything about the skit until the next day. When I saw a tape of the opening, I couldn't believe it. I was disgusted. Later I asked Eric, who was then 12, if he had seen the beginning of the game. He told me he had, so we talked about it for a while. Eric had been in the locker room before enough games to know that something like that could never happen, and he thought the skit was dumb. I wondered, however, what other young kids might be thinking after watching that skit. I also wondered what Eric was thinking, but not telling me. During my next media session, I didn't wait for anyone to ask about the broadcast. I brought it up and said I thought it was totally inappropriate. I said I was displeased with the sexual nature of the skit and it being shown on primetime just before a nationally televised, family-friendly football game. I said I thought it was a slam on NFL football players, and I was upset with ABC for using an African-American player. Unfortunately, of the many things I objected to in the skit, the only thing people focused on was the last statement. I began to hear comments that I was racist and opposed to interracial dating, which isn't true and entirely missed the point I had tried to make. I did believe that ABC was either very insensitive or deliberately stereotypical in using an African American player for that skit, but my comments had nothing to do with the actress. I knew for a fact that the network had not approached Peyton Manning about being in the skit, and I was sure they would not have asked Brett Favre or Tom Brady either. I was disappointed in ABC for coming up with the idea, and I was disappointed in T.O. for going along with it. I was surprised that more players, especially those who were African American, didn't see anything wrong with it. Terrell had created the perception, even if it was in jest, that he would be willing to miss a kickoff to have sex with a stranger. The whole thing sent the wrong message about morality, responsibility, and NFL players to kids like Eric. But all of that got lost just because I mentioned race. Some people did get what I was trying to say. Bill Belichick, head coach of the New England Patriots, was one of those people. He backed me, saying as I had that he'd be willing to take a pay cut if the NFL needed commercials like that to pay the bills. So we've learned earlier in the book that Tony was taught when he was an assistant coach how to deal with the media, and through the years overall he's had a positive experience with the media. However, he did have two incidences with the media in 2004 that got turned around and his words were misused against him, which, if you know anything about the media, happens all the time, right? They take like one little soundbite out of a 5-minute interview, let's say, and they make a headline, they spin a headline out of it and twist your words around. So the first time the media did this was when he made a comment about a skit that Terrell Owens was in before a Monday Night Football game. And Tony had a lot of issues with it, but his main issue with it was the fact that, hey, you know, this is supposed to be a family-friendly broadcast. You have kids watching this, and that's what you're promoting, right? That's not what we stand for, or at least that's not what we should stand for in this league. And he did also make a comment about the race and the fact that, you know, they used Terrell Owens and not another player in the skit. And the media latched onto that last part rather than the rest of his speech, which was all about like family values and making sure that it is like a family event, that, you know, a whole family can sit down on a Monday night and watch a football game together, and they don't have to be worried about seeing stuff like that. And so that was the first time where Tony kind of, his words got misconstrued by the media and taken way out of proportion. The second media stir occurred when I tried to bring a little balance and levity to an incident involving Randy Moss of the Minnesota Vikings. Thankfully, this was a much smaller deal. After a touchdown during a playoff game at Lambeau Field, Moss pretended to moon the fans. His actions were clearly inappropriate, and I didn't want to excuse them. But at the same time, I was somewhat amused because I knew what was behind Randy's act. When asked about it, I said if there was ever a place we could count on for a mooning, it was at Lambeau. I had played there every season from 1992 to 2001, sometimes more than once, and I had learned that it was tradition there for a few Packers fans to drop their pants around their ankles and moon the visiting team's bus as it left, regardless of the temperature. When Moss scored the winning touchdown, I knew what he was doing. He was beating those Packers fans to the punch. I got plenty of mail from people who thought I showed a double standard in defending Moss after being so outspoken about protecting the image of our players in the ABC incident. And they were right. In retrospect, I should have been much more clear in stating that I was explaining, not condoning, what Randy Moss had done. Those two incidents made me even more aware of the need to think through the ramifications of everything I say as a head coach. I'm still learning. In the second incident, where the media takes what he says out of proportion and kind of spins it, is with the Randy Moss incident, which means I don't know, Green Bay Packer tradition, so I wouldn't have known that was a tradition for their fans to moon, right, the visiting team's bus. But as someone who's been a part of football for so long, Tony Dungy did know that. And so when he makes that comment, it's because he understands the culture, he understands where Randy Moss was coming from and kind of beating the fans to the punch. But he's also okay, I understand the double standard also that I had here. I condemned this skit that had Terrell Owens in it because it wasn't family friendly, and yet I'm trying to explain away what this other player did with mooning or pretending to moon the crowd. And so you said those two incidents just really made me think about even more so how I interact with the media and really making sure that I'm very conscious of the words that are coming out of my mouth. That was off the field. On the field, we had another fun year. We went 12-4 and won the AFC South Division for the second straight year. Our defense continued to improve, but our offense, especially our passing game, reached a level never seen before. Marvin Harrison had been playing at the Hall of Fame level as our right wide receiver for several years. Reggie Wayne, our first-round draft choice in 2001, was now growing comfortable in his role on the left side, and the year before we had acquired Brandon Stokely to play in the slot. In 2004, those three players became the first set of teammates in NFL history to each reach 1,000 yards receiving and 10 touchdown catches in the same year. Okay, so that's exciting for the Colts to have that milestone. Peyton Manning set an NFL record with 49 touchdown passes. That was a great accomplishment, and I was especially pleased that he had set this record while throwing only 10 interceptions. So again, that's a huge record too for Peyton Manning to achieve. So the Colts are having a great year that year. Our prophetic conversation in 2002 was coming true, and the transformation of our offensive mindset was clear. Peyton had thrown 23 interceptions the year before I arrived, and 19 our first year together. In 2003 and 2004, he had thrown only 10 each year, and his touchdown passes were now coming in record numbers. We were finally playing explosive football without committing turnovers. My biggest learning experience that year, however, was from a game we lost. We played Kansas City on Halloween. We had beaten them in the playoffs the year before in a shootout, but this year they lit us up, 45-35. We had just lost 2 games in a row, something that hadn't happened for a long time. I sensed that the guys were concerned, especially about the defense. I was very direct at Monday's team meeting. Men, we're not going to bring in any new players. We're not going to add any new defensive schemes. In fact, we're not going to change anything. We are the same group that went to the playoffs last year. We just have to do our jobs a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit sharper. I really didn't think anything of it at the time. That's just what I thought we needed to do. But Gary Brackett, one of our linebackers, said later that because of that reassurance, the players were able to relax and concentrate on improving rather than worry about whether they still had a job. I would use that talk again during a critical time down the road. Bill Belichick, New England's head coach, had supported me over the ABC flap, but of course he wasn't much support to me on the field. We still didn't break through and beat the Patriots. As sharp as we had played most of the year, we just couldn't seem to duplicate that sharpness against New England. We lost the season opener to them in Foxborough, Massachusetts, 27-24. That was as disappointed as I've ever been after a game, and I let the players know I was upset. We fumbled twice, once at their 1-yard line, and threw an interception in the end zone. We gave up some big plays on defense, but still had a chance to win at the end. We were driving in the last minute, but gave up a sack with a missed blocking assignment. Then Mike missed his first field goal in over a year. We had lost to the Patriots again because they had done the ordinary things better than we had. I knew we were going to have a good football team, but I had known New England would too. Over the rest of the season, we would have to win 2 more games than the Patriots to avoid coming back to Foxborough in the playoffs. It would be tough to do. We played well the rest of the year, but we just couldn't make up that ground on the Patriots. So in January, we found ourselves back in Foxborough, and the game followed the same maddening script. We fell behind early, allowed them to control the football, and lost 20-3. New England had a great football team, and they would go on to win another Super Bowl that year. Through these painful defeats, we never had the feeling that we couldn't beat them. We simply had to play as well against them as we had played against other teams. Easier said than done. Once again, I closed out the 2004 season in the visitors' locker room in Foxborough, telling our players we would regroup, work hard, and do what we do in 2005. I hoped they wouldn't lose faith, because I was certain that 2005 would be an unforgettable year. So once again, they lose to New England, and it's because they just didn't do what they're supposed to do, right? They made all these mistakes, all these errors. And again, going back to, right, the title of the chapter, Death by Inches, is those little details that add up that cause you to win or cause you to lose. In the case of the Colts for 2004, right, it caused them to lose that game against New England. But Tony tries to be encouraging to them at the end, right? And he says, next year is going to be our year, right? We just got to do what we do.